Welcome to a presentation of Project Management for Low Voltage Contractors, a continuing education course brought to you by the Mississippi Security Association. Project management has become almost a separate profession within the low voltage community. However, you can learn to increase your proficiency with project management, and hopefully we're going to do that in this presentation. Upon completion of this presentation, you should be able to define the role of a project manager, also an auditor or facilitator, to establish and maintain a project schedule and use techniques and decision-making process in your work. Understand the term return on investment and understand total cost of ownership. So we will first begin by defining a project. Projects are temporary endeavors undertaken to create a unique product, service, deliverable, or a result. So when we think of a project, then it is a temporary job that your company undertakes to produce one of these deliverables in such a way that it could be a security installation, it could be a video installation, access control, overhead paging, fire alarm system, bidirectional audio amplification system for firefighters. So there's a lot of projects that we can undertake and deliver with this. So these deliverables are tangible and they've got value to the end user. A project might involve a single individual or a group of multiple individuals or organizations that come together to produce something, like to build a brand new building. We have a lot of organizations that will be involved in that. So when we look at our projects, a project may be simple. It might be completed in a single day, while others, like a new office building, is going to take months, even years, to be able to construct. So when we think of project management, this is that process. It's accomplished through the appropriate application of knowledge and skills and tools and techniques that you perform to bring a project to close, actually to bring it to fruition. Now, project management is not the same function as business management. In business management, that is managing an ongoing operation, and it's designed to produce an income and jobs for the company's employees and for continued growth for the future survivability of the company. So these are two totally different concepts. So a project manager is that person that has the overall responsibility for the successful execution of this project. While not every project is complicated to the extent that all of the skills that manager has developed is used, the ability to anticipate risk and to adjust to risk that come up in a timely manner is a very important skill that this project manager must develop. So when we look at the projects for a low voltage contractor, you may say, well, what can be managed? Well, the four primary constraints that affect the final project outcome are the scope of the work, the time it's going to take to do that work, the quality of your product, and of course, the budget. So the more complicated a project is, or the more demands for the same resources that a project manager has to deal with, that it is going to require a greater level of skill and knowledge to produce the desired results for that. So as the project becomes more complicated and involved, a project manager may be the leader of a team that is working on the project. And while the project manager is not expected to perform every task involved in this project, he may be expected to coordinate the activities of the team members to ensure that the completed project meets the customer's expectation without running over the budget. So to better understand the pitfalls of project management, then we're going to look at each one of these constraints and see, how it would affect the outcome of a project. So some of the pitfalls that you run into, especially if you have poor project management, can result in obviously missed deadlines or cost overruns or poor quality. So in today's business environment, a project manager must be able to manage tighter budgets, shorter timelines, the scarcity of resources, and rapid changing technology. Failure to do proper management will cost the organization, and in some cases, more than just the loss of revenue that is non-recoverable from the budget overrun. Because if you don't have contingencies built into your contract for cost overruns, then that is total loss of revenue for the business. It could also be loss of reputation within the community, and that can affect additional work. And having a bad reputation can last for years. And of course, poor work will attract the scrutiny of code officials, which could result in more frequent inspections and further delay your project. So, we do have to manage. Now, looking at the scope of the project, we said we should be able to manage the scope. In a bid situation, the scope of the project will be defined by the project specification that was issued by the architect. Sometimes the scope is described by the bid documents, and they cannot be met as they are written. The bidder is responsible to ask any questions that would lead to clarification before you submit a bid, and those questions need to be asked before the deadline. So what is going to be the scope of my work? Typically, this is done by submitting a request for information, or what we call an RFI. If the contractor is dealing directly with the facility owner or the occupant of the property, then the scope can be formalized in the contract that you draw up with that end user and outline the work that you're going to be doing, the scope of the work. So it's important that all of the work is described in detail. If the project consists of phases, then each phase should be described in order that they're expected to be completed in. We have to be very careful with something that is called scope creep. This is when a stakeholder requests a change in the original contract or in the original building. And what may seem like a simple request from a stakeholder, such as relocating an access control panel and a door lock power supply from the electrical room location specified on the contract drawings to a new location in a computer server room on the other side of the building 200 feet away, that could result in a major cost in time and materials. So the stakeholder may express that since the actual panel and the power supply has not been installed, that only the electrical conduit has been installed, the move should not incur an additional cost. But that's a trap. Rerouting of electrical conductors will take time, and possibly additional materials. If plans have to be modified and submitted to an AHJ for approval, there could be additional fees, and it can affect the schedule, other trades. And so when you hear this simple request, well, can you do this? Well, that's actually a change in the original contracted work baseline, and it does affect. So anytime there's a change, then we should consider a change order for that. Time management is an important aspect of what we try to do, keeping a project on track. And the way that we normally do that is to develop a schedule that lists all the activities and the tasks that are going to be performed and the duration of those tasks. A project manager doesn't have to be an expert in all of the technical skills that have to be performed, such as installing conduit and running system conductors and installing devices and programming the system. He should have a team. He should have an installation manager that knows more about those types of things. So the skills that we talk about really is about managing those times that other people are going to be involved. And so I'm going to ask that person about the time management. How much activity can you do this week? You know, and if we're running behind, then is there a reason we're behind? Is there a way to catch up? So time management is going to be a very important aspect that we can control. The quality of your work product is very important, and quality is achieved by strict and consistent commitment to follow the standards and to achieve uniformity of the product or service or the installation so that we can satisfy the customer or the user's requirement. One of the driving factors to ensure quality is making sure that workers have the proper amount of time allotted for the completion of the assigned task. And when a schedule gets behind, many general contractors try to cut short the time allowed for the remaining task, which could result in poor quality of work. And quality is what we're trying to achieve. We want to make sure we meet those specifications, the adopted codes and standards that cover the installation of the product that we're providing. And then we said that we could manage the budget. And there's a lot of reasons that a budget may not actually fit the project. There are some companies that will try to ballpark a budget number based on similar size projects that they have completed in the past. However, each project will be unique and it's got its own set of issues that need to be considered. It is possible that a current project is being installed with a different subcontractor or by an installation technician that is pretty good at his job, but he may not be the best technician that you use to install a previous system. So there can be a discrepancy in those skill sets. Materials could also be different. And obviously materials can have an effect on both labor and possibly material cost. So when you look at how we come up with a budget, it's very important that we look at all of those cost items that's going to go into the submittal bid for this project. Some contractors try to assign the cost per square foot using some computer-based estimating tools. And there are some out there. And some of them are actually pretty good, but low voltage is slightly different from what would be used for high voltage electrical contractors, which a lot of these computer-based estimating programs are designed for. So we need to look at each one of these projects individually and try to come up with a budget for that project itself. So those are the variables that a project manager is really responsible for. Now, to calculate a return on investment is something that we do to determine whether or not a business is going to make any money in taking on a project. And the process of calculating this return on investment is evaluate the efficiency and the effectiveness of this investment that's going to be made by the organization to do this project. In the past, I've had contractors come and say, look, we would like for your company to be involved in this, and we think that this is a high-profile job. There's going to be a lot of people that see this job, and so, can you cut your price just a little bit so that we can, we'd like to use you, but, we need some negotiating room in this process to make sure that we get this job. Well, we still have to look on this return on investment, because the company might make more money doing 3 smaller jobs that have a higher return on investment than to undertake one large job that will tie up the workforce for like 9 months and then go back and cut the money, the budget somehow to be able to get this job. Maybe we don't want all jobs out there. So we do look at this return on investment. The investment that we're talking about is the investment that the business owner is putting in, his money, his resources. His resources is the workforce that works for his company. Can he get back a return? And is it going to be profitable enough to tie up his resources for the next 6 to 9 months or 18 months, however long this project takes? So we are concerned about what is the return, not so much as, is this going to give me a lot of exposure? Because it might give us the wrong kind of exposure. So we want to make sure that it's actually worth it to our company. We are not a nonprofit organization, not as contractors for that. So when we've talked about a project, you may say, well, when does a project start? When do I need to start planning? Well, the project starts, and it really depends on how this project is generated, but the project starts once you have made an offer and that offer has been accepted. And that can be, working as a subcontractor for an electrician and you have signed a contract that says you're doing it, or if you are working directly for the end user, that you have a signed contract specifying what you're going to do. Then the project manager becomes involved. Prior to that, maybe you had an estimator that was estimating the project, but until it's actually accepted, then a project manager becomes involved, and they then are responsible for leading that project through until completion. As I said, if you're dealing directly with an end user, then a project actually may start a little bit earlier than that. You might need a project manager involved during the interview with the stakeholders in doing a needs analysis, because what we have to establish is there actually a need, and is this going to benefit the end user, and is it a project that we're interested in doing? So when dealing with the owner or the end user, it's important to get as much information as possible about the project and what the client is expecting the system will do for them. And we ask questions and maybe suggest possible solutions once we find out what they're interested in. And this can also be used, this needs analysis can be used as a training session to let the customer know the full extent of our system and the capabilities that we can bring with one of these low voltage systems. Well, once we have met with the customer, then we need to go back and check the building codes. You know, is that going to affect us? We need to know about permitting, any fees requirements. We have to ask questions. Is this system going to tie in with something else? If it's an access control system, then it has to tie into a fire alarm system. Is there a fire alarm system in the building? So we need to know those things. And then we can start this process by building a work breakdown structure. This is called a WBS. And this is our definition of the tasks that need to be completed. And that helps us to know the types of information that I'm going to need then to produce a schedule that could be followed in the field. I need to know what job functions need to do. And if you're dealing right with the end user, then you have to prepare a detailed project scope statement that is going to specify that scope of work so that you can come up with a formal contract. So in that needs analysis, it is very important to understand all the things that we have to do. When we ask, what are the responsibilities of the project manager? Well, a correct answer, and this is a good answer for just about any question that they ask you about code, standards, or your system. And that answer would be, well, that depends. What are the responsibilities? That depends. It depends on the project manager's roles and what they have to do. We can kind of look at a project manager as a juggler here. And we've got a juggler with balls in the air. He's got to keep those balls moving. It's kind of like terrifying on the inside because you don't want to drop one, but you have to keep the balls moving to entertain the crowd, right? So these responsibilities change during every phase of the project. You can't just say, well, these are the overall responsibilities, because they can change. So let's look at the typical flow. And this is a very good image of the activities that a project manager can be involved in. It can be involved in the initiation of the project. If he is meeting with the end user, if he's developing that work structure breakdown and trying to establish, what is going to be the scope of that project, that can be in the initiation. And then we go into the planning phase. And once we have a plan, in the planning phase, we actually develop that schedule. And then we go into the execution phase. And now the manager's activities are going to be going out to project sites and having project meetings and keeping up with, do I have material on site? Some of the things that happen once you get into this execution phase, that is when we find those change orders coming through. And so the errors that say control could send us back. If there's a change order in execution, it can send us back to planning. And in planning, now we're going to have to start, going back, preparing drawings, coming up with a new budget, filing requests for information, I mean, we're back in that phase again. And then that takes us back to execution. Well, the whole point is the project ends in the closing. So the activities are going to change as we go through this. Now, the most common management methodology that we use in the low voltage construction industry is known as critical path method, or CMP. And it starts by categorizing all those activities that we need in that work breakdown structure that I mentioned. That will help us identify all of those activities. And some activities can be done in parallel with other activities, but all of those activities have to be completed before we can turn the project over. So when you look at these phases individually, in the initiating phase, we need to determine the key stakeholders for the project. Now, it doesn't really matter, some of the methodologies that we use. There are other methods out there. Some of those methods include PRINCE2, which is Project in Controlled Environments, Event Chain Methodology, Agile Project Management, Lean Project Management, Extreme Project Management, and of course, the Critical Chain Project Management, referred to as that critical path method. When we start looking at the 5 phases then in project management, we will change the project manager's duties and jobs functions as we go through each one of those phases that we talked about. So one of the primary one is the initiation phase, where we determine who the key stakeholders are. And in this, we need to get the documentation together. A lot of times we will have access to the drawings that were put out by the architect. And I know I've been in the position when I was doing project estimation, and an electrical contractor would call me like the day before a project bids, and he says, I really need a price from you on this. I'm going to provide you my auxiliary power drawings. And can you give me a price? I need it by like 8 o'clock in the morning. And that is one of the things that really puts us in a bind, because we need to know a lot more information than that. In the initiation phase, we need to get all of the drawings. We need to get have access to view this contract that we're going to be signing, and have a solid understanding of what needs to be done before we go out there and start bidding on this project. So one of those things, identifying the stakeholders, is some of the information might actually be in those drawings. Usually on the first 2 pages or so of the drawings, the architect is going to identify stakeholders. They will tell you who the owner is. They will tell you who the architect is, the engineer, who the authority having jurisdiction will be, what codes and standards that you're going to be using. So there's a lot of information that we need from those initial pages of the documents that we have. If we are developing it, we're working with the end user and we're developing it, then there's some information from the stakeholders when I identify them. I want to make sure that I get names and phone numbers, email addresses, business address, who to contact, and what's the best time to contact them. Because failure to get that information can lead to delays if questions come up, or if you need decisions that have to be made during this execution phase of the contract. It's very important that we have the information on the stakeholders. Planning phase is made up of several different steps from that list. And anytime some of the elements of the original plans change, the manager must modify the base plan. They may have to modify the timeline, or they may have to modify the budget. And some of these changes are going to require a request for a change order, or they have to be approved by more than one of the stakeholders. So in this planning stage, it's made up of these: develop a scope of work, select your vendors, formulate your budget, have a project meeting, establish your project schedule, and manage the documentation on the job. And all of those things are important for the completion of this job in a timely manner. So when we look at developing a scope of work, especially when there's more than one person in the company working on a specific project, a scope of work helps coordinate the activities. So if I've got a team out there, a very large project that I've got several people involved, it's important that all of the team members have an understanding of what the client is expecting this project to do and what their responsibility is. So we will develop a scope of work. In this scope of work, we're talking about the equipment, what jobs the contractor will do, and how the installed system will work for us. The purpose of a work breakdown schedule will help identify all of the tasks that need to be completed. And by identifying each task, the appropriate order for that task can be identified, and we can assign a time duration that can be calculated. This step is important in the development of a budget for a project, and it also creates a list of tasks that can be measured, and progress can be measured and tracked to keep us within the time frame that we have agreed to produce this project in. So this is just a little chart showing a breakdown of all of the things that need to be done. And so we've chosen an AV system to kind of show you, and there's different tasks, and this could be assigned to different team members to be able to accomplish those. Another part of planning is to actually make vendor selections. And when we make vendor selections, we may have a choice of which vendor, and it might not be just an evaluation of the equipment, but what the vendor can do for you. Some of those things might be, if you're not good at bending conduit and you need a fair amount of conduit installed, then you might subcontract an electrician that is skilled at bending conduit. He would bring a level of expertise that you may not have. Now, obviously, I've been in the business for a while. I can bend conduit, but you really don't want me to. You know, I might ruin 2 or 3 pieces before I get one correct, or it may not be done in the prettiest job that I've seen some really good electricians do. So that could have an effect on vendor selection. Another thing that might have an effect is maybe I've been asked to provide something like a air aspirating smoke detection system, and a common trade name in that field is Vesda. There are several others, but they were one of the first ones. They developed the technology. Vesda is very early smoke detection. Well, Vesda may cost me a little bit more, but with their engineers, they lay out the pipe schedule. All I have to do is supply them with drawings, a scale drawing, and their engineers do everything, hand me back a package of material that I can now take to a code official and get approval on without me tying up people in my office to try to lay out, do the calculations, because that is a performance-based fire detection system. You have to prove that your system will work mathematically. Well, that's typically what an engineer does when he designs a system. So yes, I may pay a little bit more money for that, but I'm going to get a lot more service. So that would come into the decision that I make for my vendor selection. And then I'm going to have to add a dollar amount for that value. And that will go obviously into my budget. Well, the budget, a lot of people think that budget is the selling price of the system that you're going to install. What you've told the customer you'll install this for. And they say, well, that's my budget. But it's not that simple. A budget should actually be assigning a cost to every part of the system. And every item that I have in that work breakdown schedule needs to have a cost. My labor needs to have a cost. My equipment needs to have a cost. Storage needs to have a cost. Insurance needs to have a cost if I've got to have insurance. Shipping, programming time. I mean, all of these things are actually going to have a cost. And so when I look at my budget, if I have only budgeted for labor on installing a system, I may budget 35 hours of labor on a small system install. And that may be 2 people that I'm going to be providing and divide it out. Well, that is a cost that I need to look at, because what happens if I have to put 4 people on this job to get it completed in the time that I said that I could complete it in? So it's critical when we budget to keep accurate records on what it costs so that I can go back and review this at the end. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at later in this presentation. Some of the common things that are often overlooked are the size of the facility, or the construction type, or the number of devices, and obviously the distance of the project from your shop. So when I look at that in the original planning, did I take that into consideration? Did I take into consideration that the construction is going to be tilt-up concrete building, and you're not going to be able to have access in the walls before they form this, because they pour the concrete and then they tilt up the sides, put a roof on it instead of stick built. So there's a lot of things that maybe we have to look at. Now, if it's an existing building, it's possible to do a walkthrough, and a lot of architects will put out a notice. If you're interested in bidding on this type of project or a specific project, we're having a walkthrough Thursday afternoon at 2:00. Meet at the front office. So that is something that we need to take advantage of, because renovation of existing buildings, even though they're being modernized, are going to have some unique construction features that will definitely affect our ability to go in and put those systems in. So those are some common things that people just don't think about. We need to make sure that we consider them. It is important on larger and more complex projects that there be more people than just one person involved. So we need to identify the best people for each part of the project. An employer may have a single employee that is he's the best programmer, and he can program equipment in short periods of time and just have no programming glitches and just do it great. But I don't need him out there every day pulling wire. even though he's a good employee and he could probably do it, I can find somebody else that I'm not paying his cost load on, like a wire puller or a conduit installer, that could better do the task than putting a skilled member out there on the project. And we may have to maybe share skilled members. If you've got a programmer and you've got multiple projects out there, you need to keep him available for other projects. So we need to work together as a team. We need to identify those team members that have the skills that and where they're going to fit in my plan. And then, of course, once we have got our plan down and identified those people, then I need to bring them in for this initial project meeting. And this original project meeting for each one of these projects is going to kind of set the tone for the entire team and how you're going to proceed. So this is part pep rally, part informational, and part motivational, because what we want is everybody on the team working for the success of the team. So we may need to present the project and describe what the client's end use is going to be and what he expects this system to do for him. Talk about the equipment that you're going to be installing, discuss time frames. Some of these larger projects, you may have, 18 months to complete. Well, we've got to keep the team kind of working towards that 18-month deadline. And I know that there's going to be other projects coming up in the meantime, but that's why large projects are not always desirable for smaller companies. In this kickoff meeting, this is really where your project and your team kind of come together and make sure that everybody is on board with that. Like I said, it's part motivational. We want to be upbeat in that meeting and talk about the project. Now, when we create this project schedule and we actually talk to our team about that, there's several things that have to be done in this. We've got to figure out what those tasks were, how long each one of those tasks is going to take, what resources they're going to require, and in what order they have to be done. So some of the problems that we might have is that if you omit a task, you might not be able to complete the project. So when we define our tasks, we need to be exact about what has to be done. And if we underestimate the length of time or the amount of resources required for that task, that could affect our schedule, make us miss a schedule. And obviously, if the schedule is blown, then what are you going to do to make up for that? Well, you're probably going to lose money. So we do need, in this establishing that project schedule, well, there's a good tool that we can use to help us prepare a schedule and figure out what needs to be done and in what order. Now, some of these tasks can actually be done in parallel. So a PERT chart, and this is a kind of a definition or a diagram of a PERT chart. It will help us define those tasks and place those tasks in an order and show, what activities could be run in parallel. Because there are some things like writing in-user tutorial and editing and formatting them and printing them can actually be done while the system is being installed. And that can be done by office staff. When we create our schedule, we do need to look and make sure that we find the best people for the tasks that we've got on our task schedule. And we try to use the best skilled employees for a project so that we can meet that schedule. Just like in bending conduit. Yes, I know about the concept of bending conduit, and I've actually bent a little bit in the past. I've also know about the task of terminating fiber optic cables. And I have gone to school. I've learned how to do it. I have terminated some fiber optic cables in the past, cut them, polish them, put the ends on. But I'm not the best person for that. If I've got a skilled employee that can do that work, or if I would be better off getting a subcontractor to do that job, then I can actually save money because I'm better at programming. I'm better at, developing plans. I'm better. So there's certain things that might really need to go out, and that can be part of our plan. Finding the best people for the job, because unskilled employees make mistakes, and that is going to affect our budget. That is going to affect our timeline for completion. Obviously, that's going to affect the outcome. Now, there is another chart. Here we can use colored markers to kind of keep up with the task, the ones that we have identified, and we can set timelines as to when those tasks have to be done. And normally, we have progress meetings. Now, in some jobs, they're weekly progress meetings. In other jobs, they may be biweekly, or they may be monthly. But this is where we try to keep up with what's going on. And close communication with our team, with our field workers, ensure that we have the proper details to keep up with these timelines and whether or not I'm progressing on schedule. Well, of course, PERT charts and Gantt charts are those charts that we already looked at that kind of divide those things out. But here we're actually using the Gantt chart, using colors to tell us what phase we're in, when it has to be done, to show activities and the days that we have to complete those activities. So that's a method of keeping track of our actual work. Now, producing project documentation, we have to do this to ensure that, first of all, that we get a permit, because a lot of jobs have to be permitted, and you've got to submit documentation. So there's two general categories. One is submittal documentation. The second category is as-built documentation. And so there's a different time frame for each one of those. On submittal documentation, we actually have to document what we anticipate that we're going to do and show a layout of how we're going to do that so that we can get the permit. Well, the concept of how we're going to do something may not actually be the way that it's done in the field. This first submittal of documentation, if I have developed drawings and I've submitted them, let's say drawings on the fire alarm system, and I submit them and I get an approval for that, then I give those to my subcontractors. Maybe I'm subcontracting an electrical contractor to install conduit and wiring. And so I give him those plans. And when he's out there in the field trying to install this system, he may find that he cannot install it exactly like I have depicted on the drawings that I prepared, those shop drawings. If he makes changes, then he should redline those drawings to indicate how he really ran the wire, or if it is a device location, if he's changed a device location. Once those plans come back in, then we produce the as-built documentation. How did it really get installed? And that is an important part of this puzzle that we put together. And it needs to be kept up with, and it needs to be documented, because that second category, the as-built documentation, we have to provide that to the owner upon completion of the job that we put in. And it really doesn't matter what size of the job, we need to have that specific documentation. Now, on fire alarm systems, it's very important. That's a life safety system. But think, if you ever have to go back and work on this job after it's installed, what do you really need to have to be able to work on it? Because it might be a year down the road, or 2 years, or 3 years down the road. Can you remember everything that you've done? Or maybe you've gotten a promotion and somebody else has got to go out and work on that system, or expand that system, or modernize. Whatever it is, we need that documentation. So documentation has to be produced, and it has to be clear, and we need to manage it in a manner that everybody kind of knows what's going on. Now, some of the things that I have seen architects or engineers do is add requirements in the bid documents that require specific written end-user documentation for a specific system. They don't want the generic that comes from the manufacturer of the equipment. They want specific. I mentioned fire alarm. If you're putting a fire alarm in a one-story building and it's going to be total building evacuation using horns and strobes, then you don't need documentation in your end-user documents that talks about elevators, or moving to stairwells, or partial evacuation of the building. So they may specify that the manufacturer's generic system description shall not be part of a completed system. And those are the words that I have seen used by architects and engineers. If you have to write this, a key to create this successful documentation, keep the language simple and familiar. Don't assume that people outside this industry know the terms or the concepts that we talk about, and document all the key steps that a person would need to know. During the execution phase, a project manager's duties are going to include these 4 important things: manage expectation, manage the team, maintain the schedule, make sure that the system gets programmed. So improper management of those tasks will have a very negative effect on the overall project. And as we look at these tasks in detail, like manage expectation, well, what is the customer's expectation of that system, and how is it going to perform? As we talk to the customer or the owner of the property, then we have to make sure that we keep that communication channel open and understand what they're really trying to do with this system. It's unfortunate that some owners don't really understand what an access control system can do to them or for them. It's not just about locking up doors, but we can do so much more than that. We can tie it into time and attendance system. We can use access control to control building management services like air conditioning and lighting, so that we can save them a lot of money. There's just a lot of things there. So this communication is very important in this phase of the work. And we might feel that we're ahead of schedule, but yet the contractor might feel like we're behind. schedule, and that if we lack that communication, then they will say, well, we're not working so well together. I probably will not use you on another job. So we do have to keep lines of communications open. Team communications is also important, especially when a project lasts for months or even years. And remember, the team has to be motivated and reminded of the goal, because especially with these long jobs. So a good project manager should have the ability to keep that sense of team spirit alive, instead of, if you kill the team spirit, it's just going to put the project behind. So we want to be able to pass information to them and also be available so that they can pass information up and down the chain, ask for updates from the field. If they have some complaints, handle them quickly. That is what managing a team is about. So just being available and keep this information flowing in both directions. Very important. Now, sometimes there's going to be some issues that come up that maybe we cannot work out either within our own team, or we can't work out with a general contractor. And if there is a problem like that, we can bring in a facilitator. A facilitator is an independent meeting manager that can come to project meetings and guide the group, hopefully to a successful decision or a solution to a problem that we have. And it's done through this consensus. So during this life of the project, and these meetings that we go to, like progress meetings, occasionally a decision is made that is not going to be agreed by all of the members. I've had a situation where in a high school gym, installing a fire alarm system, they wanted the ductwork and the detectors and everything finished. And they said, we have scheduled for the floor finishers to come in and finish the gym floor next week. So this week, you have to finish all your work in there and get the lifts off of the floor so that it can be finished by next week. And there's no way. So in this situation, we could have a facilitator come in. They ask questions. They determine why these dates cannot be met. And one of those things is like the duct work has not been finished in the gym. The electrician has not gotten the conduit up there. We don't have wire in the conduit that is there. And, we can't connect these things up until these other things are finished. And then we'll be able to get in there. Now we're going to put off finishing the floor. But the general contractor really wanted that floor to be finished because he wanted the gym to be part of his completion report for that month so he could get paid more money. And it just doesn't work that way all the time. So a facilitator is this independent person that can come in and manage meetings, especially when they start getting sticky. So we do have to maintain the schedule, and there are ways to do that. And if we're working within our time frame, there are times when there's going to be delays. So if you use something like a Gantt chart that helps track your schedule, maybe another contractor is going to interrupt that schedule, or maybe a weather condition. You can have delays because of inclement weather, or there could be delays on getting equipment on the project in time. And so we try to keep up with the schedule so that we can see when these slowdowns occur and hopefully can mitigate the changes that we will have to make to keep us on track by some corrective actions. And then, of course, we have to make sure that the system gets programmed properly and on time. So many of our systems today are computer-based, and they're capable of many functions. Some of these functions the clients will never use. In the sales classes that I do, I talk about features and benefits. An equipment sales rep is going to talk to you about features. Oh, this panel is capable of this and this and this and this. Those are just features. What the end user is buying or what we are selling them is benefits to them, not features. What benefit can I tie to the fact that, this access control system can control 96 doors if the building has only got 20? So that's not a benefit to them. It only becomes a benefit if they need those features. So we need to look at our programming and what we need as far as functions and what need that function is going to perform for the client for his benefit. And we can write down those things and make sure that we develop a program that will do those things and provide a checklist so that when you go back in the field, you can check, is this system doing what we said it was going to do? In some cases, you could probably build this thing on a bench in your office. If you've got, warehouse space, you can put a program together, put it into the computer, whatever that system is, and actually make sure that we know how to get that feature programmed and that it will function to do that. And some of the things that you might need to know can only come from technical support from the manufacturer. So make sure that you have technical support lines when you start doing some of these programming. But we have to make sure that that system is programmed. Keep that in mind when you're doing your budget. If it's a very involved program, it's going to take a little bit of time to do that. During the control phase, we said that once you have done all your planning and you're doing the execution, then the control phase may kick in. So control is very important in project management. Control can actually trigger a new round of planning and implementation. If the customer comes in and says, I want something changed, then we're going to have to make some changes. This control, by not having a good managed control phase, that can affect our budget negatively. So it's something that is ongoing. Once you have finished the plan and you start execution, then control keeps on going until basically you turn the project over to the owner, because changes can come up at any time. This control phase includes things like managing change, tracking deliverables, and tracking cost. And a project manager needs to track the cost of the project so that he does not overrun his budget. So when we talk about managing change, we've got to communicate with each one of our team members to ensure that change orders are submitted and approved before any additional work can be completed. And that may affect my schedule. So if there is a change, we need this official work order. And all of the parties affected by this change need to know. I did have a situation where there was a change order that came out. The change order was about relocating some equipment that really did not affect me. Or when I looked at it, I said, well, that's not really going to affect me. And so when they said, do you need a change order? Are you going to submit anything? And I said, no, that change doesn't affect me. Well, I was wrong. It did affect me because it affected conduit paths and wire paths and some minor locations of some devices. So it cost me. That work had to be done. Another way that I have been affected by managing changes is I had a site project manager that was told that he needed to move some devices, and the general contractor is the one that told him, says, you've got to move these devices. And he said, okay. And he moved those devices. And then about a week later, he brought that to me and he said, we had to move these devices. We located them here and here and here. I said, okay. And I wrote up a change order and I submitted it. And the general contractor sent it back and he said, those devices already been moved. You should have submitted this before you moved the devices. And that was another loss. And so when we see these changes coming, it's got to be appropriate to what is the situation, what causes this, and if it requires additional time, then we can ask for additional time. And it's not just the money, but it's the labor involved. It is the possibly equipment, and it is going to be a drain on your time. So I learned anytime a change comes down, if they change the scope, then I submit a change order. And that change order may just be for more time, or it might be effective because I may have to pay an electrician. It's not really any work that I have to do or that my team has to do, but I've got an electrician that I've got to pay to move conduit or to provide additional drops. So we do have to communicate, and that's an important part of managing changes and timely communications in managing changes. When we talk about deliverables, we normally think of the devices that we're going to have to install, but it also can be support for subsystems. And subsystems may be something that we tie into. Our system is going to activate something on somebody else's subsystem. So when we look at deliverables, it's not just the equipment that we order. That could be part of the process, but it may have to be something that we have to document, and we're going to have to submit that documentation for approval, or we're going to have to produce more documents to explain how this hardware works. So we need to ask a couple of questions. What are our deliverables? Is that just equipment? Is that a complete system? And how do you track the development of those things? How long does it actually take you to develop each one of these deliverables? Like if it's a change in programming, how long is that going to take, and how is that going to affect your timeline? That is another part of that controlling our cost. So when we look at cost tracking, it should occur all along the process. Project managers should not wait till the end of the project and where they're going to do an audit to find out that they've exceeded their budget. They need to know that, because if there are changes that have affected it, did I really cover the cost in my change order request is going to affect this project? So cost can be categorized in three categories. Cost of the goods that you're delivering, and we track those costs by the material list, the purchase orders that we have, how much. The cost of time and labor. We use timesheets how much time do the technicians have on the job? And then cost to your company's bottom line. If you go over budget, how's that going to affect your company? We make sure that we keep up with this. And if we see this cost going off the tracks, that we're losing control of cost, then we have to find a way to bring those costs back into line. And it may be, through a change order. In the closing phase, this is where all of the tasks are finished and the system is operational. So I've got to have closing documentation, and I need to have any service agreements and monitoring agreements filled out so that I can present these to the client. And even if you did not get their approval before we set up this closing, we need to have those. And one of the things that happens the most often is that during this closing phase, when we are showing the customer how this system works, providing them with our documentations, so many times the person doing that never asks for the annual service agreement, or they never ask. They will say, we have a service agreement in here, if you want to review that. We have a monitoring agreement in here if you decide you need monitoring. You're giving a customer an out. So when we're when we're dealing with this closing phase, we need to make sure that service is asked for. In part of that training, the end user on the system, we need to talk to them about what needs to be serviced. On a video system, the camera's lenses need to be cleaned. The camera angles, the views need to be checked to see if they're still getting the same view that they started with. If it's an access control system, do the doors still close? Do the door closers need to be adjusted? And if they don't need to be adjusted, if it's a gate, does the gate need to be serviced? The rollers on the bottom of the gate. I mean, there's just so many things that go into these systems that the customers, maybe they thought, oh, well, I've got an electrician on staff. I don't need that service. But if you explain it as you go, then they see that there's really a lot more to maintaining these systems that we put in, other than just coming out there and spending 2 hours walking through the building, doing a visual inspection, making sure that everything looks like it'll work. In the closing phase, we provide the system of documentation, the as-built drawings, the site-specific software. And in some cases, we may have to sit for a project review. And we may have to provide a job cost report for that project review, especially if you're working on jobs in the bid market where public money is involved. Then they actually want to see this job cost report. So what is that job cost report? This is where you have to turn over paperwork that details the cost related to the project. And we see this a lot in federal government contracts, and it's going to be audited to ensure that they paid a fair price for the system or service that they just contracted for. It's not that they're out to try to limit your abilities to make a profit off of this job, but they want to know really the cost. If you're dealing with an end user, the final invoice for service might meet that standard for a job cost report. They may actually ask you for a line item type costing on that project. Now, there are holdbacks typically, like a general contractor will hold back 10 or 15% of the cost of the project to kind of ensure that the project is complete, and they may require a job cost report before they release that 10 to 15% holdback. So understand that you're probably going to have to come up with this job cost report, but it's there to actually make sure that you have produced the product that you contracted for, and that you are charging a fair price, for the product itself. We also can look at something called the total cost of acquisition. In some cases, total cost will be asked for prior to a contract being accepted. And that's kind of hard to project, but when you look at it, it could be for justification of making that buying decision. So the owner wants to know what the total cost of acquisition is going to be. Well, that is basically the net price plus other costs that need to be purchased to make this system operational. And this total cost of acquisition can include research, accounting, legal fees, transportation, installation cost, but it typically does not include training, system integration when you've got to integrate with somebody else, or some other costs that might be considered operational costs. They're just looking at what is it going to cost me to get a system installed, not that service that I'm going to need on this system for the next 5 years. So total cost of acquisition. Now, sometimes you will be asked, can you provide a total cost of ownership? Well, total cost of ownership is a much more in-depth cost estimate. And it does take into consideration long-range cost between a manufacturer's product and should include training, integration of hardware. If the system is working on computer software, are there upgrades to that software, testing, troubleshooting? There's a lot that can go into that. And occasionally we will actually see this request for a total cost of ownership for 3 to 5 years. So what should it cost the owner to operate this system? Well, in the market, I have seen companies that will basically bid. They will lowball a bid. They bid the cost of installation of the equipment to where they basically just covered the cost of the equipment. And then they make it up. Once the system is installed, then they make it up on the backside, because their service calls are things like we charge $250 an hour for a service technician. And you have to pay him from the time he leaves to the time that he gets back. So if he leaves the shop until he gets back to the shop, you've got to pay him that amount of time. And your replacement expenses are going to be inflated. They can charge 3 or 4 times the cost for something like a card reader or a request to exit motion detector if one has to be replaced, or, so the total cost of ownership after 3 to 5 years may be much higher than somebody that is giving them a quote that has lower service fees and may have a better warranty on the equipment, that may have a 3-year warranty instead of just a 1-year warranty on the equipment. So when you start reading these specifications, look for those and see, does the owner really want a true cost that they can expect to pay for the installation of this system and the operation of it for 3 to 5 years? So those are some things to think about. Now, once a project is finished and it's turned over, a lot of times there are project reviews. Now, a lot of larger companies will actually bring in maybe an auditor to do this, or a smaller company may do a project review using their own accountant. But project reviews are important to identify the positive aspects and the efficiency of the team in this particular project. We could also identify areas that we might need improvement in. Where did we get behind in our budget? What could we have done differently? A company may not actually have a project review. They take the check, they put it in the bank, and they're moving on. They don't know whether they really made money on that, but they think they might have made some money, but they don't know how much money they made. So project review is really going back and looking at the cost of the project. Was there anything negatively that impacted the project? Was the schedule off? Did we not get our equipment on time? A lot of your manufacturers have gone to this just-in-time manufacturing. So if you order equipment and say, I'm doing the access control and video system in this school, and we have 18 months to build this school, then they put that on the schedule down the road. It may be a year before they start producing that equipment. So could that have affected us? And did we keep up with that? We just want to look at the projects. And it's always good to go back and look at the project to see if there's something that we could have identified and maybe should have identified earlier that we could avoid a problem or a setback. Now, if they call in an auditor, the auditor is employed by a company to evaluate the business, the process, the internal controls. They should be able to identify risk and recommend corrective actions. It could be an outside facilitator. It may actually be, an auditor within the company that is skilled in performing audits. There could be a mid-project audit to see if there's anything that needs to be improved. And if you conduct it at the end of the project, then we can use the findings of the auditor to kind of ensure future success. So what do they look for? They look to determine whether the project goals were achieved. Do we have satisfied stakeholders? What were the costs? Is there any areas that we could further develop that would make our business better? And obviously to identify lessons, especially those that we don't want to repeat because it may have cost us some money. So when you look at project managers and the role of project managers, it's not just a person that just got promoted. It is a person that builds the skills to move into a position of project management that has an understanding of these things that a project manager needs to know. It's very important because that can determine the success or the failure of a project, or possibly the success or the failure of a business. Just because a person is a good technician does not mean that that person will be a good project manager. So in conclusion, do you have any questions? My question for you is, did your project make money for the company? Because we're not a nonprofit organization. We're out here to benefit the company. We're out here to have a return on investment for our company owner. He's giving us the jobs. He's giving us the opportunities. We need to reward him with a return on investment. That's project management. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. This does carry CEU credit, 2 hours of continuing education credit for your state licensing board. So I look forward to seeing you in the future.